We're happy to welcome you today. Next Sunday morning, Lord willing, we'll begin our gospel meeting. Brother B.J. Clark will be with us. If you're joining us on social media, we hope you will make that note. And also make a note that our services Sunday will be at 9 and 10 a.m. and 1 o'clock p.m. That will be our afternoon service, so be sure you make a note of that. There will be no 5 p.m. service that day. Some of you here in the class have family members in the various congregations. They got a flyer that said Sunday is at 1:30. That's not correct. Would you please notify your family members, ask them to have it corrected in the congregation where they attend. I put a note on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you get my note, share it so that maybe others will be able to see. Sorry for that confusion, but Lord willing, we'll begin at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. We've done that, and the only reason we ever did 1:30 when we changed time was I'd already put the ad in house to house that year, and it was too late to get it out or to change it. So we stayed with 1:30, and then we brought everything into consistency until somebody else gets a bright idea and says, let's change the time. And then here we will go again. And that's called life. And life is interesting. We're studying, speaking of life, the life of the Christ. We're looking at the world into which Jesus came. And we're looking particularly at Judaism. We've looked at the sects, S-E-C-T-S, of the Jews. And now we're looking at the synagogue. And you have a handout, or at least one's been made available to you, on the synagogue. And we were moving down through the material, trying to let you get a feel of a particular place that was so very important in the first century, both during the time of Jesus and the church. We were down to Roman numeral number 8 and uppercase B. We were looking at the ruler, and we read those 3 passages that are listed in number 1. And our time then brought us to a close. We're ready for number 2, dealing with the ruler of the synagogue. In some synagogues, there was more than one ruler. If you turn to Mark chapter 5, excuse me, verse 21 begins the paragraph. The way this New King James is divided. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, now what do you have? All right, everybody have one of the rulers? Which would imply there's more than one ruler in this synagogue. One of the rulers of the synagogue came. And then this is Jairus, or Jairus, and he's requesting Jesus to heal his little daughter. Then in Luke chapter 8, verse 37, now it happened on the next day when they had come down from the mountain that a great multitude met him. Suddenly a man from the multitude cried out, saying, Teacher, I implore you, look on my son, for he is my only child. And behold, a spirit seizes him, and he suddenly cries out. It convulses him so that he foams at the mouth, and it departs from him with great difficulty, bruising him. So I implored your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here. This unbelieving generation. And as he was still coming, the demon threw him down and convulsed him. Then Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the child, and gave him back to his father. So here is this man that's asking. Now go down to verse 49. Now John answered and said, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. Now that doesn't have anything to do with the synagogue, does it? I must have put a wrong reference there somewhere. Now this has been a long time ago, and I didn't check that. I'm very sorry.
Are you in the right chapter?
Probably not. Have you found where I ought to be?
I think you said Luke 8.
I went to 9, didn't I? Well, if I may borrow Opal's speech, I was close. Luke 8, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, David. That's why I need you here. Luke 8, let's try it again. In the right chapter, I hope. So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. A ruler. Thank you. That's what I was hunting. A ruler of the synagogue. Verse 49. And while he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, Your daughter's dead. Do not trouble the teacher. So a ruler of the synagogue, one of the rulers of the synagogue. And then we looked at Acts 18 last week, but let's go there again. It never hurts to look at a scripture twice. And if I'm at the right one, we'll look at this one. Acts 18, I knew this one by memory, so I knew I was at the right place here. This is where Paul has come to Corinth. 8. Then Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue. So in Corinth, we don't get an indication there was more than one ruler. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Verse 17, then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue. So here's a different ruler. Excuse me now, one of the reasons you may have Sosthenes here is what happened to Crispus. Why?
Either time was up, but I don't think that would be it. But I would say he was kicked out because he believed in Jesus and the way.
What word did you use before out?
Kicked out.
Kicked out. Okay, I didn't get the word. Okay. All right. Whether he was kicked out or not, he left, didn't he? And what was the Jewish population there doing in response to Paul's preaching? Well, context. What you said, they wouldn't believe him? The Jewish people, some of them, yes. What were the indication the majority doing?
Making his word.
Yes, what are the words used here in the immediate context?
They opposed him and blasphemed.
All right, they opposed and blasphemed. So when Crispus obeyed the gospel, would he have been welcome in the synagogue? So that's why very likely you have a new ruler of the synagogue, Sosthenes. And these folks are mad because they can't get to Paul. So they take it out on Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue. So here you have some synagogues had more than one ruler. They were the rulers, most probably, you have to say probably a lot of this because first of all, the Bible doesn't tell us, and secondly, history doesn't always give us the details. Probably chosen from the elders of the synagogue. I'm stressing here there were elders in the synagogue. It was the ruler's business to control the synagogue services, to decide who was to be called upon to read from the law and the prophets. He was also one who preached. Turn to Acts 13. Acts chapter 13 and verse 13. Now when Paul and his party set sail from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia. And John, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and sat down, Paul and his party. And after the reading of the law and the prophets. All right, here's somebody been called on now to read the law and the prophets. I don't know if they had a bulletin and they had somebody appointed to put the work list in the bulletin. Bless his heart if they did. And he got his bulletin and he thought, I'm to read the day, or they did that when he arrived. I don't know. But after the reading of the law and the prophets, notice you have an order here. The rulers of the synagogue sent to them, saying, Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. All right, would you like to preach today? Then Paul stood up. This ruler got a better response than I do when I ask you men, do you want to preach today? He got a much better response than I get. Paul stood up and motioning with his hand. What would that be called today in public speaking? Okay, but what is, it's probably been a long time since you had freshman speech. What is motioning with your hand when giving a speech called? Gesturing. He's using a gesture. That's what that's called. Y'all thought I had a cramp. I was trying to work it out. That's called using a gesture. So he motioned with his hand and said, Men of Israel, and you who fear God, you God-fearers, that's very likely Gentiles. And he preached to them. So sometimes the ruler would preach. Elders are supposed to be able to teach, which would involve something like preaching. I was fortunate in one congregation, we had two elders, both of them would preach. So I never was concerned about when I needed to be gone. Both of them were good preachers, and they would preach or teach or whatever we needed. So that's what you had here with the ruler. Now, also in Luke 13, and verse 14, but the ruler of the synagogue, well, let's see what we're talking about. Verse 10. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. Behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over and could in no way raise up, straighten up. You ever seen people like that? I have a very good friend that's bent completely over. Her mother was like that. And we had another lady in another congregation that was like that. Both of them wonderful people, all three of them wonderful Christian ladies, but they couldn't straighten up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. And he laid hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. Circle it. But, here's a contrast. The ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation. Would you be happy if somebody healed somebody that was in that condition and now they're straight? Or would you be indignant? Now here's national Israel in their reaction to Jesus. They never saw a woman that needed help, and they never appreciated a woman who received help. They saw one thing, their tradition. And notice, he answered with indignation because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, there are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day. Do you know, those of us who preach try to be nice? You may not believe that with me, but with most of us, we try to be nice. But you know, there comes a time that you've reached your limit. You ever been there? And then there's that one that just kind of puts you over the limit. And then your mouth takes over before your mind starts working, and then you have to straighten stuff out. Jesus had a limit. Now notice, the Lord then answered him and said, Hypocrite! If he'd been one of our preachers in some of our congregations, the elders would have met immediately and said, we don't need him. Look at the Lord here. Hypocrite! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? Notice, each one of you. Now that's getting personal, isn't it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, one of us, whom Satan is bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loose from this bond on the Sabbath? And when he said these things, all his adversaries were what? Put to shame. And all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. Now, Jesus said more than shame on you, didn't he? They never saw a woman in need. They never had a thought of helping that woman. And when she was helped, they were indignant because Jesus had violated one of their traditions. Ruler of the synagogue. So you get the idea of the religious climate into which Jesus would come. The ruler was to look after the discussions. The ruler was to keep order. So everything, notice that, everything was to be done decently and in order in the synagogue. They had an order of service, and it was to be done orderly. And the ruler of the synagogue was responsible for that. Be sure everything's done correctly. All right, then you had the servant of the synagogue. Look at Luke chapter 4. Don, pull up e-sword here, please. Luke 4:20. Then he closed the book. Now, notice verse 16. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, habit, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. See, the ruler would have said, you read for us today, or he may have been down to read that. And the indication here is he went into the synagogue and he was invited. Would you read the law and the prophets today? And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah, the scroll of Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of Jehovah's quotation from the Old Testament, is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then he closed the book and gave it back to the, what do you have here? I'm sorry? Minister. Attendant. All right? Luke 4:20. All right, put your little cursor on minister, the number beside the minister, please, and left click. All right, where's the... in your, should be in the second pane down below your Bible. There should be a pane of, you've got dictionaries crossed out, one of them be Thayer, one of them be Strong. Yeah, hit Thayer there. All right. Hupertes is your word there. And here are the ways it can be translated. Servant, an under rower, a subordinate rower, anyone who serves with hands, a servant. In the New Testament, of the officers and attendants of magistrates, as of the officer who executes penalties. Of the attendants of the king, servants, retinue, the soldiers of the king, of the attendant of a synagogue. Of anyone ministering or rendering service, anyone who aids another in any work, an assistant. Now notice, if you were translating, well, of the preacher of the gospel. So if you were translating and you came across this Greek word, there are your choices as to how it could be translated. See, Greek words can use several English words to translate, all right? What's the context of this passage? So you would know which of those meanings you would attach to this Greek word. What's your context? I know I'm teaching hermeneutics and not life of Christ, but they do parallel. Where are we in the context? What?
We're in Nazareth.
Say it again.
We're in Nazareth.
Okay. Where are we in Nazareth? In the synagogue, all right? If one of, well, it went away. If one of those definitions had attendant in the synagogue, out of all those definitions, and you took the immediate context, which one would you choose? Attendant in the synagogue. a servant in the synagogue. See, it's not diakonos, from which we get our word deacon, a servant of tables. But here, it's a servant of a king or various others. And so that's the way translators have to decide which word, in their opinion, in the context, is the best way to translate it. That's how translation works. So we're in Nazareth, we're in the synagogue. All right, you have an attendant in the synagogue as one of the meetings. I think it's on down a little low. No, we passed it. I'm sorry? 1B2. 2, okay. Yeah, of the attendant of a synagogue. All right, our immediate context is synagogue. So we would think, okay, we would translate this attendant or servant of the synagogue. You with me? So that's how translation works. Huh? What verse? Luke 4:20. The New King James, the New American Standard says attendant, and you have minister. So the King James people decided we'll put minister there, which means servant. But how much better in understanding if you have that word attendant of the synagogue, because that's one of the possible English meanings of that Greek word. So he is one who works in the synagogue, and notice what his role was. He was handed the book of Isaiah, verse 17, you come down to verse 20, he closed the book and gave it back to the minister, to the servant, to the attendant. So would you imply here that in verse 17 it was the attendant who handed him the book? Yeah. So he would be what we might call a book runner. You know, the people in a restaurant who bring you food out are called food runners. Did y'all know that? They're called food runners. They seldom run, but that's what they're called. They're running the food in and out, all right? Here's a book runner in the synagogue. Thank you. I think I'm through with that. You're very helpful on some days, and I appreciate today being one of them. All right, so we look at this servant in the synagogue. He had to see to the lighting of the synagogue and to keep the building clean. Now, Eddie would be half a servant because he sees to the lighting of the building, and Sue would be the other half of the servant because she cleans the building. But this servant had to keep the lights on, and he couldn't flip a switch, could he? And clean the building. That sounds like deacon work to me. During the service, he had the special duty to bring the sacred scrolls from the chest, see that, a chest in which they kept the rolls, to the reader standing on the platform, and to replace them when the reading was finished, and we just read that. He blew the trumpet 3 times at sunset on Friday evening to announce the beginning of the Sabbath. He wielded the scourge when punishment had to be meted out to anyone in the synagogue. Now notice that. Somebody acting up in the synagogue, they scourged them. Turn to Matthew 10. Now Jesus is sending out the 12, verse 5. Now verse 16, notice. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. You are to be innocent. Circle it. But beware of men. All right, beware of men. Now men here would especially reference national Israelites. Beware of men who are not going to believe you, not going to receive you. Beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils, notice it, and scourge you in their synagogues. All right? The attendant, the servant, would be the one who would be responsible to seeing to the scourging. Turn over to Matthew 23. This is Jesus pronouncing this woe on the scribes and Pharisees. Verse 34. Therefore, so that tells you read before. Indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. All right, that's the attendant's work. Turn to Mark 13, which will give us the same information. Mark 13. Verse 9, watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils, and you will be beaten. You all have beaten there? In the synagogues. All right, beaten, scourged. In the synagogues. New American Standard say beaten there? Flogged. That's more of a picture of the scourging, isn't it? With the whip. You'll be flogged. Speak up when yours is different. It might help us a little bit. Acts 22. Flogging's what they did in old New England. And also, have any of you been to Williamsburg? The people in that settlement, you misbehaved, sometimes you'd be flogged. Acts 22, verse 19. So I said, Lord, this is Paul, they know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and what? Beat, everybody? Beat. I beat those who did what? All right, those who believed on you. So here Saul would act out the role of an attendant on some occasions, he says. And notice, in the synagogues. All right, I don't know. One woman sent her son to school the first day with a note to the teacher and said, if Johnny misbehaves, whip the child next to him and Johnny will get the point. I don't know how many people had to be beaten before they got the point. But this is some of what went on in the Jewish synagogue, and the attendant would be responsible for that. He was also an elementary teacher, so he had to teach school. He had quite a job, didn't he? Turn on the lights, clean the building, arrange everything, whip those who needed whipping, teach the lessons to the elementary people. So you're attendant in the synagogue. Then you have the delegate of the congregation. This office was not permanent, but one was chosen at each meeting by the ruler to fill it. And he conducted the prayers, the Jewish prayers, in the synagogue. You have the interpreter. It was his duty to interpret or translate into Aramaic the passages of the law and the prophets, which were read in Hebrew. Not everybody spoke Hebrew, but many of them, in Palestine particularly, would speak an offshoot of the Semitic language called Aramaic. Turn to 1 Corinthians 14. Anybody know off the top of your head what 1 Corinthians 14 discusses? Yes, it's a part of a triune section there. Chapters 12, 13, and 14 deal with what? Spiritual gifts in Corinth. Verse 28, 26. How is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation? Is that all miraculous? Yes. It's in those 3 chapters that deal with spiritual gifts, and these gifts listed in chapter 12. Let all things be done for building up the church, edification. So whatever your spiritual gift is in Corinth, the miraculous you're able to do, when you come together in the congregation, if you use it to build up the church, not show off. That's the point in this chapter. Not call attention to yourself. If anyone speaks in a tongue, let there be 2 or at the most 3. Notice, do you have in turn? By course. That means one after the other, not all of you blurting out at one time, one at a time. And let one do what? Interpret. Why would you have to have somebody interpret? You have different languages represented there. Corinth was a melting pot. Corinth was a seacoast city, wasn't it? And you have people coming, going all the time from all parts of the world. Trade center. All right, you're going to have people in the synagogue that speak different languages. So if somebody gets up and speaks in Latin and there's nobody there who can understand Latin, would somebody have to interpret? Somebody said if you lost your khakis in Georgia, it would mean you couldn't find your pants. If you lost them in Boston, it would mean you couldn't start your car. So you have to be able to interpret. Some of you have been up north and you know they say khakis. Khakis for the car keys. So they couldn't start the car. I knew some of you'd be working on that for a week. So let one interpret. Circle it, but if there is no interpreter, what? Don't use that spiritual gift in that assembly, because nobody will know what you're saying. All right, so here you would have the interpreter in the synagogue. Now, 1 Corinthians 14 is dealing with the church, the congregation in Corinth, but they had that interpreter. So you have some carryover, I believe, that the synagogue set the stage for some of the things the New Testament church used. Probably not a permanent office. One verse was read from the law, then the translation would be given. It's hard to read more than a little bit for a translator to interpret. I was fortunate when I lived in Talladega, Alabama, which is the headquarters for the school for the deaf and blind, that when I preached, we had a state certified interpreter for the deaf. And he stayed up with me. I didn't have to slow down. I preached my regular speed. And he didn't have any problem until I used a word they didn't have in their vocabulary. And then he'd turn and look at me. And I knew I had to find a synonym that would fit what they would understand. But otherwise, he stayed up with me, and he was good. But when you use an interpreter that is not that good, it's better to do it in spurts. And you say a little, and then they interpret, and you say a little more. The prophets were read 3 verses at a time, then the interpretation would be given. Both the reader and the interpreter were to read in the same tone of voice. That'd be hard. We don't all have the same intonation. neither louder than the other. Boy, whoever interpreted for me would have to get on it. So your interpreter would read, I'd read, and he'd read in the same tone of voice, and he wasn't reading it louder than I would, or any softer than I would. Now, he had to work, didn't he? To be an interpreter, and interpretation's work. Then you had the almoners, alms for the poor. That's, I believe some of the modern speech translations say charitable gifts. Alms for the poor were collected in the synagogue. Turn to Matthew 6. Verse 1, take heed that you do not do your, now the New King James here has charitable deeds. And you have alms, right?
You said 6:1?
Yes.
You're practicing your righteousness before men.
You don't have alms or charitable deeds in that verse?
It's Matthew 6:1, right?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Take heed that you do not practice your righteousness, New American Standard. Take heed that you do not your charitable deeds, your alms, before men, to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, conclusion, when you do your righteousness, New American Standard,
It says so when you give to the poor.
in verse 2.
Yeah, so it starts out, so when you give to the poor.
All right, see, that's an inconsistency between 1 and 2. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, you give to the poor. When you, King James, give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do. Where? And in the streets, and they do that for what reason? From? All right. Now, notice, they gave their alms in the synagogues. So we call it taking up a collection, but this was for the poor. Go ahead.
In the American Standard, it's in verse 6, verse 1, it uses practicing your righteousness.
That's what the New American Standard said.
And then when it comes down into verse 2, it says when you give to the needy.
All right, pull that up. I want to see. I didn't know we had this discrepancy, but I want to see what the words are.
Now, this is in a different, this is not in Esau.
No, I need Esau. I need the Greek. I want to see what the words are. See if there are two different words there. Maybe. Sometimes the American Standard, New American Standard are more accurate in the translation, so I want to see. That's Matthew 6. All right, take heed that you do not your alms. Put it on the word by alms. All right, click that and go to there. Mercy, pity, especially is exhibited in giving alms. Charity, elimosune is your word. The benefaction itself, a donation to the poor. All right, go back to verse 1. That's where New American Standard and American Standard say practice your righteousness. Okay? That's your word. All right? Take heed you do not your alms before men, be seen of them. Come down to verse 2. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, put it back over here on alms, all right? All right, come on down. See, it's the same word. Mercy, pity, especially is in giving an alms. So you're dealing with your same word. So however you're going to translate it in verse 1, you ought to translate it in verse 2 to be consistent. You see that? So sometimes the translators make a choice. And that's what it is. They chose to express it this way. Really, the American Standard, the New American Standard, gave the context in their interpretation rather than the specific word. Because what he's talking about, practicing your righteousness. But there are 3 specific ways you do it, and these are listed. Thank you, I'm through with that. All right, so you had the alms giving, the almoners. The collecting was to be done by at least 2 persons, and the distributing by at least 3. Why would you have 2 or 3? Well, it's a possibility you get more done. There may be an underlying reason. Accountability. There may be an underlying Judaistic reason. How were accusations established in a court of law? 2 or 3 witnesses. That, I don't know that that's the underlying thing here, but it's interesting. Accountability is your idea. Paul did that, didn't he, with the collection? He didn't take the collection for the poor saints and keep it himself. He always had people traveling with him that could account that he didn't spend it on himself. Alms of the dish were articles of food collected daily and distributed every evening. Give us this day our daily bread. This was required of all who had been a resident in the community for 30 days. Alms of the box was money collected each Friday and distributed weekly. This was required of all who had resided in the community for 90 days. So there were requirements to be met as to who gave and to who gave what. We'll nail that there. We'll start with the leader of divine worship, Lord willing, in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening and participating.